English translation, 276th contact, Friday 17th September 1999, 1907 hours.
Dear friend, I would have come here this evening or at night too if you had not called me. But look here, this is Samjong. He also wants to get to know you, but he did not come here exclusively for that because he has been asked by Quetzal to change something to do with the Sohar Center.
I understand. I know what this is about. Welcome to my home, Samjang. I am very happy to meet you. But what does your name mean? I mean, what meaning has it?
The pleasure is mine. The lucky one is the meaning of my name.
Thank you. Actually, it should be clear that you also speak German, if you already come here to exchange some words with me. But it is interesting.
Those of us who are in contact with you, we all speak the German language. This has already been explained to you at an earlier point in time. This is also true if a contact should only be one time.
But in the past, you also used language converters and translators. I still remember that very well.
That is right. But in the meantime, this has changed, because now everyone is learning the German language, even if there is only a short-term assignment on the Earth. The reason for this is you, so that if necessary, you can be contacted personally if the situation requires it.
Very pleasing. May I still ask you, Samjang, what is your main field of activity?
In addition to various other activities, I am mainly dedicated to subatomic vacuum technology as well as subatomic crystal physics and crystal technology.
Aha, so that is why you have been assigned by Quetzal.
Yes, I should greet you especially from him.
Thank you. I am very happy to hear something from him. Please bring him back my dearest greetings.
I will gladly do that.
Thanks again. But can I ask another question now?
Certainly. If the question is addressed to me, which I assume because you are looking at me.
You go right in your assumption. So it was Sunday night, the 12th of September, 6 days ago, when I was urged to go out of the living room and search the sky because I just felt like there was something up there. Bernadette then joined me and asked me if I was observing something in the sky. Giving her a vague answer, she followed me into the garden, explaining to her that I had heard the gas burner sound of at least 2 hot air balloons. Together we went behind the shed, where we actually saw 2 hot air balloons coming from the east, soon followed by 3 more. All of them flew at an altitude of about 800–900 meters directly over our place, with a speed of about 40–50 kilometers per hour. Seeing if more balloons would follow, Nathan saw high above and a little behind the last balloon a white silvery shining disc about the size of a football, which flew at the same speed behind the balloons, shown from below by the sun already setting far in the west. When Bernadette pointed out the object to me, I also saw it after a few seconds. But then Eva and Freddie came running into the garden, the latter armed with his Nikon camera with a 500mm telephoto lens. Nathan first saw the object, then Freddie, who then lost sight of it and could not find it again, so he could not photograph it. But maybe a photo would not have been good either, because the object was about 9,000 meters high. Although it glittered white silver, as already said, it is really questionable whether a photo would have been good anyway. When we saw the object, which was clearly a disc, and therefore surely a beamship, it was exactly 1824 Ers. And at 1831 hours it simply disappeared suddenly, as if it had dissolved into nothing. Afterwards we went out of the garden discussing and watched the sky standing on the monument square. It would be nice now if another object like this appeared so that one could photograph it, Bernadette said. But nothing happened, at least not for the time being. But a quarter of an hour later, it was exactly 1846 HRs, Bernadette said excitedly. Look up there. There is another one coming. And indeed, from the east to the west, Another object was hovering in the same direction as before. White, silver, shiny, and again about the size of a football, perhaps a small bit larger, and this time flying only at an altitude of 6,000, 7,000 meters, and again vertically over our center. And this time Freddy, holding the camera vertically up, was able to take some pictures. This one, take a look. Here, Samjang, you can see them too. In my opinion, Freddy has actually photographed a beam ship from below. By the way, Louis was also present at this second object, who joined us in the meantime, and who, like us, could observe the passing ship for 6 minutes before it suddenly disappeared. It has to be said that Natan fetched his binoculars, with which I could then follow the object, and also saw that, shortly before it disappeared, it tilted to the side, and in this position looked like an upside-down oval. Then it tilted back again, so that the pure disc shape could be seen again. Seconds later, it disappeared without a trace. And now the question of whether you know anything about these two objects, and whether they were actually two different objects or just one, as Bernadette suspects. That is exactly why she said that the first object flew back again without us seeing it, only to fly again from east to west, again at about 40-50 kilometers per hour. The altitude this time was about 6,000, 7,000 meters. Were there perhaps the foreigners out and about once again?
Sunday Surprise by Bernadette Brand, Switzerland.
On Sunday, the 12th of September 1999, Louis Memper, Eva Bieri, and I, Bernadette Brand, had Sunday service together. After we had finished everything, I wanted to do some personal work. I had just plugged in the iron when I saw, through the open door, Billy walking towards the garden. I stopped him for a moment and asked him if he was watching something in the sky. As we talked, we heard the unmistakable sound of hot air balloons. Billy said he was interested to see how many balloons could be seen and where they were coming from. So I followed him into the garden, where we first spotted a yellow Agrola balloon to the south, followed a short distance away by a white sharp balloon. Shortly afterwards, a yellow-red-blue balloon with the inscription Flugplatz Sitterdorf Airfield came from the east, moving in a westerly direction like the other two balloons. We followed their path in the sky, and apparently we were not alone, because I heard my son Natan below the greenhouse talking to Selena, Billy and Eva's little daughter, and showing her the balloons. Selena in his arms, he came up the stairs from the greenhouse while Billy and I were still watching the first two balloons. When Natan and Selena were just at the height of the monument, he suddenly called out, "Look, do you see that bright little dot behind the balloon, too?" "What is that?" As I quickly turned around, I immediately spotted a white-silver object behind the blue-red-yellow Sitterdorf balloon. I pointed out the location to Billy with my finger, and after a few seconds he also saw it. At an altitude of about 9,000 meters, as Billy estimated, a disc-shaped, brightly shining object was clearly visible, moving leisurely in the light of the already low sun and standing out brightly against the blue sky. At that moment it was exactly 1824 HRs. It seemed to be following the balloon, which was at an altitude of about 800 meters, westwards at roughly the same distance. Slowly, the balloons, which had grown to 5 in the meantime, moved in a southwesterly direction. The ship, however, which was clearly and unmistakably round or disc-shaped, kept moving westwards. When the yellow-red-blue balloon was already clearly southwest of us, an airliner appeared and flew over the balloon from the south to the north at an altitude of about 5,000 meters. Now we could wonderfully compare the difference in size and shape of the three flying apparatuses. At the bottom, at an altitude of about 800 meters, the balloons were traveling at a speed of about 40 to 50 km/h. Above, at an altitude of about 5,000 meters, The airliner was flying very fast, and about 4,000 meters higher, the brightly reflecting object was moving leisurely in a westerly direction at the same speed as the balloons. As the airliner passed over the balloon, I noticed that it was much harder to see compared to the beamship high above it. We could see the plane clearly, but it appeared somewhat blurred and almost transparent through the haze because it was below the direct rays of the sun. The object, however, which was very high above the haze and was directly illuminated from below by the low sun, reflected the light so brightly that it was absolutely clear and sharply recognizable, although it was moving at a considerably greater distance from us than the aircraft. For a whole 7 minutes, from 1824 to 1831 HRs, we were able to observe the ship before it slowly disappeared in the direction of the sun in the brightening sky, and then suddenly disappeared. Freddie, who in the meantime had also appeared in our garden at Billy's call, dragging along his camera with the 500 telephoto and the tripod, only saw the beamship briefly after Billy had made a long effort to show him the exact location. When he was finally ready to photograph it, he could not find it. Ava came out of the greenhouse, took Selena from Natan, and disappeared with her towards the house. She had no patience to follow Natan's directional instructions, but merely sent a quick glance to the sky and departed. In return, she later complained that she never got to see anything. After the ship had disappeared, I wanted to get on with my work for good while Billy, Freddie, and Natan talked about the size of the object, which Billy described as football-sized, Natan as a dot, and Freddie as invisible. After they had discussed it for a few minutes and told Louis, who had come from the house in the meantime, about the sighting, Billy called me to the square in front of the monument and asked me if I also thought that the object had been the size of the condensation trail diameter of a plane that had just passed. Natan and I thought this size comparison was correct, while Freddie claimed that at best he had seen a tiny dot. In the meantime, about 15 minutes had passed and we were still talking about the object. Freddie was allowed to listen to some good-natured remarks because he had not managed to photograph the ship despite having good camera equipment. "It would be nice if an object like that appeared again so you could photograph it," I said, standing with my back to the monument. I lifted my head and, high above the birch trees, once again caught sight of the same object we had observed 15 minutes earlier. "Look, up there. Here comes another one," escaped me, and at the same moment I heard Billy say, "There above the birches, it is hard to believe." I was very excited when I saw out of the corner of my eye that Billy was looking at his watch. It was exactly 6:46 Hornyers. The heads of Natan, Louis, and Freddie flew up into their necks, and only a moment later, my son dashed off towards the house to fetch the binoculars. The beamship was just vertically above our heads as Freddie's camera clicked diligently. Billy told him to make sure he had the head of the flagpole in the picture as well for a size comparison. A minute later, Natan came shooting around the coach house corner, and now Billy and he took turns watching the ship with the binoculars, while the rest of us followed its path with the naked eye.
Image photographed vertically upwards. On the left, the head of the flagpole. On the right, the beamship recognizable as a white disk. Enlargement of the white luminous beamship.
This second ship was only flying at about 6,000 to 7,000 meters and was therefore much bigger to see than the first. Just like the first object, it reflected brilliantly the light of the sun as it approached the horizon. Just like the first one, this ship was also clearly visible as a disk, and it was also moving in a westerly direction. Again, a plane passed across the sky from south to north, and we could compare the size, shape, and speed of the two objects well. While the plane was speeding across the sky, the ship was moving at a very leisurely pace. After about 3 minutes, it tilted its angle of inclination by about 45 degrees to the left and was thus clearly recognizable as an ellipse, before it even increased the angle to 90 degrees and therefore appeared almost cigar-shaped. As it changed its angle of inclination, it also changed its direction of flight to the southwest. The whole maneuver was done very slowly because it did not fly faster than about 40 to 50 kilometers per hour. After it had completed the change of direction in a wide arc, it moved back to its previous horizontal position and was again visible as a disc-shaped object. I was also able to observe this second ship in its demonstratively slow flight until it almost merged with the brightly flickering western sky. And just before it was so far away that we could no longer see it, it disappeared from the sky without a trace from one split second to the next. Now, of course, we had a lot to talk about and also a lot to puzzle over for the next few days, because 2 daytime sightings within only a quarter of an hour had never happened before. The second sighting was actually only 15 minutes after the first, and it lasted only 1 minute less than the one from 1846 to 1852 HRs. Who could that have been? Billy was of the opinion that it was 2 different ships, while I was more inclined to think that it could have been the same ship both times. But there was one thing we were almost sure of: it could only have been our friends, though it was also possible that one of them could have been an alien object. We waited for about 15 minutes in the open, always watching the sky in all directions, in the modest hope of maybe seeing something again, but unfortunately in vain. So I set about my ironing for good while Billy and Freddie were still talking outside. Somehow I was completely blown away because my last daytime sighting was 17 years ago, and at that time I could only see Quetzal's ship briefly at the very end. But we were in for another Sunday surprise, because I had hardly hung the first blouse on the hanger when Billy and Freddie hurried past my door. I quickly slipped on my slippers and followed them a few steps, while I asked if they had seen anything again. Billy called back that he had seen a figure in gray clothing on the footpath and that they were now looking to see who it was. I could not catch up with the 2 men in my worn sandals; they were too fast for that. I stayed outside for a few more minutes, keeping an eye on the path, before I gave up because I could not see anyone and also could not hear anything, so I assumed that the walker we had heard had already disappeared in the direction of Schmidruti. If he had turned back on the path, he would have been right in my field of vision. Shortly after I had given up, Billy returned and told me that during his conversation with Freddie, he had observed a figure in gray clothing on the footpath. Because the gray of the clothing looked familiar, he wanted to know who was on the way to Schmidruti, so he immediately set off in the direction of the biotope. Freddie followed him. He had heard footsteps on the path but saw nothing because his back was turned. However, although Billy and Freddie hurried extremely quickly, they could not find anyone. I had also heard the footsteps before they rushed past my door, but while I stood outside watching the path, there was nothing to see and nothing to hear. The figure had just suddenly disappeared without a trace. Freddie, who returned walking to be on the safe side, found only a burst balloon with a card attached to it. Otherwise, there was nothing and no one to be found. It was not until Friday evening, the 17th of September, that the mystery was solved when Billy asked Florina if she knew anything about what had happened the previous Sunday. She told him that the first beam ship had been her own and that Taran had been with her.
They had passed over the center at an altitude of 9,500 meters at a speed of 40 kilometers per hour. The second ship we observed 15 minutes later contained Zaphanat Paneak and Samjong, and they flew over the center at an altitude of 7,500 meters and at the same speed as Florina. The aircraft we had seen during the sighting were at an altitude of between 4,500 and 6,000 meters. The mysterious walker who had so easily disappeared without a trace was Samjang, who was at the center for the first time and wanted to take a closer look at the immediate surroundings. He had noticed that he was being watched, and because Freddie, whom he did not know, was not very familiar to him, he made sure that he could no longer be seen. Samjang's name means the lucky one, and professionally he deals mainly with subatomic vacuum technology, subatomic crystal physics, and crystal technology. According to his appearance, he belongs to the Taljda people because he is also yellow-skinned, and the sound of his name is also somehow reminiscent of the peoples who live in the Far East. In a way, I felt richly blessed, and I was childishly happy that I had been granted the privilege of seeing the second object first. But I was also happy for Natan and for all the others who had been present at the two sightings. I was especially pleased for Louis, as it was his first daytime sighting of this kind. For me, these events had brought back some of the magic of the old days, of the late 70s and early 80s, when we often spent our nights trying to see something, when our knowledge and the many proofs of the presence of our distant yet close friends had bound us together and helped us, despite all our differences, to tackle our task and also to withstand heavy storms. Perhaps some of that magic will return in the future. In any case, I am heartily happy for all who are fortunate enough to be present at a sighting themselves.
No, that was not the case. At least not for the ones you saw, because these two flying apparatuses belong to us. Taran and I were in the first and higher flying apparatus. We flew at an altitude of 9,500 meters at a speed of 40 kilometers per hour. The second flying apparatus were crewed by Zaphanat Paneak and Samjong. The altitude was 7,500 meters, and the speed was also 40 kilometers per hour. The reason for crossing the center airspace was that, on the one hand, Samjung could get an impression of your terrain. On the other hand, foreign flying objects were on the way, which we observed, as so often before, above your center. Of course, we were also interested in these flying machines this time, which flew at a higher altitude than we were, which is why we shielded ourselves from their view from above, so that only you could see us. And your feeling did not betray you, in that you were actually called out by Taran.
But it was not a telepathic call.
No, it was only a few impulses that should move you to go outside, released in the hope that some more group members would join you and then be able to observe our flying apparatuses.
Actually, Zaphanat Paneach wanted to fly over your center at a lower altitude, but this was not possible because a large passenger plane was passing by from the south at an altitude of only 5,000 meters. These were then followed by two more earthly flying apparatuses, airplanes, as you say, from two different directions, and their altitude was also between 4,500 and 6,000 meters.
And did the balloonists and the airplane pilots or the airplane passengers also see you?
We do not know that. But it should be unlikely. The flying machines flew other tracks, and besides, we might have flown too high for an observation by them. The balloonists, on the other hand, were too low, and their view upwards was probably obscured by the balloon. And whether other persons on the Earth were watching us, that escaped our knowledge. And if we had already been sighted, which is hardly to be assumed, then this must have been a lucky coincidence because we did not make ourselves noticeable to anyone but you.
Of course, the human beings of our world are not exactly observers of the sky. which is why they do not see many things that take place high above them.
That is right. But now, my friend, we have to devote ourselves to our tasks again. Goodbye.
Likewise, goodbye. Perhaps the opportunity will arise again.
Then you are not staying in the terrestrial realm?
No, have to go back.
Then hopefully for a reunion. Together, take care.
Friday, the 17th of September, 1999, 22:41 hours telepathic contact.
You are already calling me, my friend. Did something happen?
No, I just forgot to ask a question. That same Sunday evening, while watching your beam ships, Freddy and I heard heavy footsteps on the trail above the center. Wondering who was walking around up there, we quickly walked along the center's main path toward Schmidruti, keeping an eye out for the upper path, where I then saw a figure in a matte gray suit walking toward Schmidruti at a normal pedestrian pace. Freddy and I quickly ran to the pile and looked up at the path, where we could see no one. So we walked to the start of the trail at the biotope, but there was no one to be seen from there either on the long open campground or on the hiking trail. So we ended up walking up the trail, but there was no one to be found, so we thought that maybe someone from you might have used the trail. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, it was Samjang. He wanted to take a closer look at the center environment, but when he saw that he was being watched, he disappeared. He did know you from our records and from the observation and contact just before, but he was not very comfortable with Freddy, as he explained to me.
Aha, and when does he intend to do his work at the Sohar Center?
He has already done that, so that is why he is not here anymore. But if you are still interested in the time when Samjang walked along the path, it was around 1910 RRs.
Thank you, that will do.